So the same thing with dutasteride is going to apply. You're going to have, when you apply it to your head, you're going to get less of a disproportionate rise in this 6-hydroxydutasteride, 4-hydroxydutasteride, 1,2-dihydrodutasteride. Is that a good or bad thing though? Are those the things that are literally responsible for the majority of the long-term pharmacologic effects? You know, I think this sort of reinforces why the topical dutasteride. What's up guys, Derek, moreplates.com. Today we're going to be talking about topical dutasteride. So, you know, there's different administration techniques even among topical dutasteride intervention in general. There is just straight up topical solutions. There are liposomal formulations. There are something called mesotherapy, where it's literally an intradermal injection of dutasteride into the scalp itself to achieve, well, the goal of it is to achieve like a high level of localized 5-AR inhibition with a relative lack of systemic absorption. And this is one of the most, you know, forward thinking of the, I don't know, treatments involving 5-AR inhibition. And it's picking up a lot of steam lately, or at least in the niche community that researches this shit. It's picking up steam, I guess. So anyways, dutasteride has been looked at in a lot of ways, and obviously orally as well. So I kind of want to just give my stance on it from what I've seen over the past couple of years of looking into this. Anecdotal findings, reports from people in the community that I'm friends with, or other anecdotes from random people who follow my stuff who send me messages. I've received just like hordes of shit over the past years of hair loss stuff. Now for dutasteride in particular, not a lot of people use it topically. It is sort of a new, relatively uncharted waters, I guess. Reason being is oral works very well. So most people are going to just use oral. And if you actually look at the clinical studies comparing oral versus topical, or even mesotherapy, oral dutasteride outperforms mesotherapy and topical dutasteride. However, this does not come with without downside, obviously, because there is more side effects found in the oral groups. Now, this is different than the, if you could see the topical finasteride versus the oral finasteride studies, you find that any kind of like disproportionate advantage it seems to have seems to essentially disintegrate upon reaching steady state concentrations in the body. It goes systemic just the same and seems to pretty much do the exact same shit as far as systemic versus scalp DHT inhibition. However, the molecular weight of finasteride versus dutasteride is different, and this is sort of where it gets a bit bro science-y, but it also is like part of the theory behind dutasteride topically being potentially a more viable therapy in a topical format versus oral of finasteride versus dutasteride. Finasteride has a molecular weight under 400 Daltons, and dutasteride is like 528 Daltons or something like that. So, you know, the classic rule is that if it's under 500 Daltons, then you can apply it in a topical solution and get it into the scalp to do what it's supposed to do locally. And if the molecular mass is over 500 Daltons, then, you know, it's thought that it's not going to be able to penetrate and, you know, yield a pharmacologic effect whatsoever, which sort of actually is part of the theory around dutasteride that sort of reinforces its efficacy as a topical solution is its molecular weight being over 500 Daltons. So they think, well, some people speculate, it's not like anyone actually knows, that it's sort of like gets like sort of in there, but like not enough that it gets like deep enough to be problematic, but it's enough to produce the pharmacologic effect we're seeking because it's like right on the brink of 500, and we can sort of manipulate the penetration with different vehicles to kind of achieve getting right where we want it to without getting like too in there, which, you know, like what is the likelihood of us actually being able to do that? You know, it's fucking tough to speculate about, but some of the blood work does sort of reinforce it as a potentially viable solution for a lot of people, in my opinion. I'm going to sort of get into my reason why after, but I'm sort of just like checking off all the boxes in terms of all the points that are like commonly brought up when it comes to dutasteride versus finasteride, the efficacy of topical solutions, and blah, blah, blah. So finasteride, like I said, we see a pretty much equivalent scalp and serum DHT reduction. Now, does that mean that topical finasteride has no merit and that it should not be opted for instead of oral. Like, not necessarily, because there is, like we've seen even with topical testosterone applications, when you apply it scrotally, you know, you can get a disproportionate spike in DHT concentrations just by the local 5-AR activity of the application site. So why could we not leverage the exact same mechanism via your scalp? You know, theoretically, if you can disproportionately increase DHT relative to your T dose by applying it under your nutsack, why can you not get a disproportionate decrease in DHT by applying a 5-AR inhibitor to your scalp right at the other place where there's a disproportionately high amount of 5-AR? You know, you would think that sort of makes sense. In practical application with the topical finasteride, we don't really see that play out in the blood work or the scalp biopsies though. However, with dutasteride, maybe it's a bit different. And something to note as well is first pass metabolism. When you apply something topically, you skip first pass, and the oral bioavailability of finasteride and dutasteride is not 100%. It is, if I recall correctly, somewhere around 60 to 65. I believe finasteride is 65, dutasteride is like 60 or something like that. So anyways, when it goes through metabolism and gets metabolized by the liver, there is metabolites that are produced. When you take finasteride, you take dutasteride. And especially with dutasteride, these produce unique metabolites with their own inherent 5-AR inhibiting properties. So part of the pharmacologic effect of dutasteride is provided not just by the parent compound itself, but perhaps by its metabolites during first pass metabolism. So when you apply something topically and you skip first pass, you get a disproportionate increase in the parent compound as well relative to the metabolites. So you're actually getting less of the what are the metabolites? So I'm going to pull up the Wikipedia thing right now so I can remember them. Let's see. Dutasteride. Let's see. Pharmacokinetics. Okay, so 6-hydroxydutasteride, 4-hydroxydutasteride, and 1,2-dihydrodutasteride. So these are the three major metabolites that form via first pass. So it's almost like, you know, when you look at oral estradiol versus transdermal versus IV versus sublingual, there's a reason you see a disproportionate spike in estrone relative to estradiol levels when you take oral estradiol. When you take it sublingually or apply it transdermally or inject it though, you have a more physiologic representation of a balance between normal amounts of estrogen relative to estrone, because you are skipping that first pass metabolism. So the same thing with dutasteride is going to apply. You're going to have, when you apply it to your head, you're going to get less of a disproportionate rise in this 6-hydroxydutasteride, 4-hydroxydutasteride, 1,2-dihydrodutasteride. Is that a good or bad thing though? Are those the things that are literally responsible for the majority of the long-term pharmacologic effects? You know, I think this sort of reinforces why the topical dutasteride may have a lot of promise, because if you're skipping this production of these metabolites to a significant extent, you have to keep in mind they have their own inherent half-lives. They have their own inherent ability to bind to 5-AR with a certain affinity, a certain binding constant, a certain dissociation rate. There's these things that are associated with all these compounds. It's an entirely new thing that you're looking at for each metabolite. It's not just what is the dutasteride doing, it's also what's happening with all this shit. Like, this is why even with oral steroids, like, half the time, like, the shit that you're taking, it's not even necessarily the parent compound yielding the effect that you're getting and you're trying to get out of it. Like, sometimes, you know, with anadrol, I speculate that the mestanolone conversion in the liver might be like a lot of the adrenergic signaling you get out of it pre-workout. Like, maybe that's why it even works to begin with. Maybe the parent compound fucking sucks as a pre-workout, you know? There's a lot of things that come via that metabolism process that you're losing out on or winning out on potentially when you use it in a different format of administration. So with dutasteride in particular, the thing that interests me is that when I see blood work before and after, I see return to baseline a lot quicker than I do with oral, which is interesting. But as well, it's also guys who are not letting it reach steady state. They're not using it consistently on a day-to-day basis. They're using it like once a week. So, you know, that might play into it. I speculate that maybe it might play into the relative lack of these major metabolites that are being produced during first pass, and maybe it's yielding in a more, I don't know, a more not elastic, but like, I don't even know what the word is, like a shorter overall drug burden slash half-life overall, because you're not dealing with also metabolizing to as much of a degree these other metabolites, which are also very potent 5-AR inhibitors. Like, let's see, D6-hydroxydutasteride has a similar potency as a 5-AR inhibitor to dutasteride. So, you know, if you're dealing with the half-life of dutasteride, and then you have to deal with 6-hydroxydutasteride too after because of oral, you know, that's like a whole new, you know, layer of metabolization that has to be worked out of your system before you can then return to normal DHT levels. So theoretically, by applying it topically, we might be able to get back to baseline quicker and potentially have a more, I don't know, the body might be more resilient to side effects because you're not dealing with like unknown amounts of metabolites at the same time that are also producing pharmacologic effects in satellite interactions and shit that you can't even predict. So, you know, maybe you're making the drug more manageable and gaining more leverage over the compound in terms of how you can manipulate it manually when you're using it topically too, because you're not getting this disproportionate spike in the metabolites. You're dealing with mainly the parent compound at this point. So that's where I think it has a lot of promise topically as well. And it sort of seems to be reflected in the blood work, like I said, like going back to it a little bit, I see returns of serum DHT levels quicker than I do with oral, just on the minor amounts of blood work I've seen. That's what I'm seeing. In addition, as far as how it is affecting scalp DHT levels versus serum DHT levels, it seems to be more favorable than that of finasteride. Now, I don't know if that's actually the case or if it's just a result of, you know, like with minoxidil, like I was speculating before that maybe minoxidil, you might be able to yield the exact same effect as topical minoxidil just by taking like a microdose orally that would otherwise yield the exact same side effect profile. But then again, it circles back to the thing of intra-tissue specific concentrations of compounds definitely yield a localized effect, like with the scrotal testosterone and, you know, reverse engineering that on your scalp. So, you know, a lot of times, like the theories in my head, I'm sort of like going to fucking ramble, and I'm trying to like circle back to my point and make it a cohesive fucking summary here. But basically, I've had a handful of people reach out to me with before and after blood work. The blood work looks solid in that when you take oral dutasteride, what happens is you nuke your DHT levels. Like you get systemic inhibition of 5-AR to a point where you are literally like a prepubescent child after you use it. With topical dutasteride, I've seen people use upwards of like double-digit milligrams on their head, which would otherwise be an amount orally, which would nuke your DHT. Now, obviously topically, you're not gonna get the same absorption as you would orally. You know, just like with minoxidil, you're using like 5% solution, you're using 50 milligrams on your head. If you took orally 50 milligrams, you get fucking destructed. With dutasteride though, if you took, you know, in the double digits, you would expect like a significant reduction in DHT, like serum, not just your scalp. But what we do see is a disproportionate decrease in the scalp DHT and lesser of a decrease systemically. Now, is that just a lag effect, or is that actual like intra-tissue localized effects going on that we're actually trying to seek and sort of like actually capitalizing on the reverse engineering the scrotal testosterone thing and actually having it work up here? I don't know for sure, but what I do see in the blood work seems good. You know, it's guys who are getting, you know, like 60 to 70 to 80% scalp DHT inhibition with 20 to 40% of serum DHT inhibition using dosages that you would otherwise think would go systemic and fuck them up. And it just doesn't seem to be the case. And these are guys that are used to get side effects from using even topical finasteride. And then they take topical dutasteride, and paradoxically, they don't experience side effects. So it's just really interesting to me. You know, maybe the molecular weight plays some role in it. Maybe it has to do with the application frequency and the half-life and the relative lack of metabolite production, because with finasteride, like all of these compounds are their own compounds too. Like when finasteride is metabolized and it goes through the liver, it makes its own metabolites too. So as far as like the inherent 5-AR inhibition potential of all of the finasteride metabolites, dutasteride metabolites, the half-lives of those compounds, how they affect other satellite interactions in the body, how they affect other enzymes and other physiologic processes that are going on at the same time. You know, you can't predict any of this shit. We only know what's going on with the parent compounds, and we barely even fucking know that. Like that's how much we're fucking extrapolating here, as we're trying to predict with relative accuracy what's going on with a parent compound with a novel administration technique, and then predict downstream what's going to happen with all of the cascades of metabolite compounds that are being produced, and what they're going to do, and what their half-lives are, and what their inherent potential is to do, blah, blah, blah. So again, we can just go off of fucking anecdote essentially and whatever studies we have available. And in the studies available, they're not too useful, to be honest. And in the anecdotes available, they're very limited, to be honest. However, it does look promising, and I think it has not only in all of the things I mentioned, but also in the ability to manipulate your dosage. With dutasteride, you don't have the advantage of finasteride where it's a pressed tablet. At least with finasteride, you can fucking break it up into pieces. You can literally crush it into dust. You can literally do whatever the fuck you want to it and make it into a micro dose if you wanted to actually titrate up and be, you know, risk averse and kind of like get the, you know, greatest effect with the lowest dose. And if you look into the finasteride data, you can see you can get a significant amount of DHT inhibition with a dose way lower than the 1 milligram pressed tablet you get as a Propecia tablet. With dutasteride though, you're given a 0.5 milligram soft gel. What the fuck do you do with that? You have no choice but to pop the 0.5 milligram soft gel. Unless you come up with some real creative shit, most people are popping the 0.5 milligram soft gel and getting full nuke DHT. Serum, scalp, everything, you know? You have no manipulation of your dosage. And it's not like it comes in a format that's different. Like with finasteride, there's a lot of manipulation you can do, you know? You can even opt for, well, this is probably a new thing that's gonna be coming up, but you know, opting for compounding pharmacies to make lower dosage pressed tablets, you know, going for, you know, a 0.2 milligram pressed tablet instead of a 1. That's something I'm going to be looking into with my HRT clinic, is if that's even fucking possible, and it should be. I don't see why it's not. But with dutasteride and these soft gels and the Avodart capsules, you're looking at 0.5 milligrams. Like, that's what's available. There's nothing fucking else available. So giving yourself the ability, and that's sort of like, you know, where topical finasteride can be advantageous too. Like at least you have a pressed tablet though you can manipulate if you're doing orally. But even when you start to cut it into quarters, the shit can turn into dust pretty quick and make it kind of problematic. Like quarters is kind of doable, but you know, like even for that, like some people, if you're getting a ProScar tablet, for example, and it's 5 milligrams, you're cutting into 1.25. Where do you go from there? If that's what you have available to you, you know, it's not like you can cut that into smaller pieces. And with dutasteride, you have no manipulation at all. So, you know, this is where the topical has advantage too, because you can literally manipulate the amount and the concentration of the solution based on what you need and not be kind of like subjected to whatever the pharmaceutical giants have essentially deemed is the dose you need to be taking regardless of what you want or what don't want to do. So, you know, with dutasteride, you can use as low as fucking whatever you want. You can use it as frequently or infrequently as you want. It's like, obviously you could use oral dutasteride, you know, infrequently, just like these dutasteride mesotherapy protocols, but you can't avoid that like significant fucking crash in DHT. Whereas with the mesotherapy and with the just, I don't know, topical in general, you have a choice between what you're applying to your head. It's not just like you have to use 0.5 milligrams and that's fucking all you can deal with. You have a choice. So as far as, you know, its merit, it is promising. And I think, you know, for a lot of people, like if you are risk averse, obviously doing a topical dutasteride experiment before going to oral makes a lot of sense. Obviously, if you were somebody who was going to go down the rabbit hole of dutasteride to begin with, you know, going the topical route makes a lot of sense, in my opinion, before jumping like full board into a oral treatment that, you know, produces these metabolites that are going to linger, and the entire compound plus metabolites is going to have a half-life of motherfucking 4 to 5 weeks. Like once you get on oral dutasteride, like you're in it, dude. You're in it for a while because this shit lasts. So with topical, it seems like it doesn't last as long, perhaps the metabolite thing. You have more manipulation of your dosage. You can get to a more micro dose and not have to deal with a massive, you know, just fucking nuke your system overnight kind of thing. And you may get a disproportionate decrease in scalp DHT relative to serum, you know? This might be the first 5-AR inhibitor that actually is able to achieve that, you know? So, you know, more data needs to come out for us to have any definitive conclusions. But for me, it's kind of like a no-brainer if you have it available to you to go with that before oral. Like, at least if you were side effect prone or worried about side effects significantly, if you don't want to go the full, oral dutasteride, I would consider like part of the most, like, it's not like nuclear, like I always talk about these nuclear options, but it's kind of like the most aggressive of DHT inhibition you can really do, as well as neurosteroid inhibition. So it's like, some people don't care enough to want to step by step, you know, put on the training wheels before getting there. But then there's some people who want the minimum effective dose with the least side effects, which obviously makes the most fucking sense. Because if you can get hair loss prevention with, I don't know, like 1/10 of the systemic inhibition of DHT and potentially neurosteroids, then why not? Then that begs the question though too, is if you're applying something right onto your fucking head where your brain is, does that have a disproportionate decrease in your neurosteroid production? You know, there's a lot of unanswered questions, and a lot of this is kind of just like bro science theory at the end of the day, but it's new shit. You know, we're learning new shit as we go, and this is what I've seen to date. I think if you're somebody who is looking at dutasteride, then topical is definitely worth exploring first to, you know, assess your tolerability of it from a more like microdose perspective. In addition, I think some people who don't tolerate finasteride very well are going to get fucked if they used oral dutasteride, obviously, so they can't do that. Like, why would you can't go to a more aggressive therapy if you used oral finasteride or topical and had problems with it. However, I have heard of people using oral finasteride, topical finasteride, getting sides, and then going to a really like moderate dose of topical dutasteride and having no side effects. It's really interesting. So, you know, I think it has a lot of promise for a lot of people potentially. You know, it may not just be for people who want to go aggressive. Like everyone thinks, oh, dutasteride is the strongest 5-AR inhibitor. So if I'm fine with finasteride, like why would I even bother? Or if I don't want to go above the, you know, intensity of finasteride, why would I bother? Well, it's like, it might have less intensity than finasteride for all we know from a serum DHT inhibition context. Then again, there are, you know, like token individuals who claim that it's going to do the exact same thing as finasteride does. And eventually it's going to reach enough inhibition systemically to essentially, you know, do the same shit that topical finasteride does. There's not really any data to reinforce anything. We just have anecdotal findings and fucking some blood work from a handful of dudes, to be honest. So for me, I take the word of guys that I respect in this community and guys that I, defer to on certain things that even I'm less knowledgeable about. And some of them, I've seen good results. So, you know, for me, that's promising enough. And the theories I've come up with through the manipulation of 5-AR in the scalp, localized activity, you know, even talking about like the topical nandrolone in the past, disproportionately spiking dihydronandrolone concentrations, SARMs, etc. All of these things have a lot of therapeutic promise, and I've seen it play out enough times now to know that there is some shit that is worth exploring further when it comes to localized concentrations of drugs. So for me, you know, the first pass thing, skipping the metabolites as much, you know, the manipulation of the half-life potentially, getting a microdose in that you otherwise wouldn't be able to do, the disproportionate decrease in scalp DHT relative to serum. Like there's so many fucking things that make this so promising that it's just a no-brainer to explore further. And for who this is viable for, I can't say like you should try this, but like you're gonna have to decide if it's a good, if you're a viable candidate or not, because it's not like it's not like there's any kind of like prescription criteria for this shit to begin with. Even oral dutasteride, like I'm pretty sure it's only approved for hair loss in like a handful of countries or some shit. It's definitely not in North America. So yeah, dude, you know, you're gonna have to figure it out yourself. Like I said though, at least the one criteria I can say is some guy who is thinking about graduating to dutasteride but is worried about the side effects, that individual would be wise to, you know, explore some of the topical stuff or mesotherapy practices before diving headfirst into a 4 to 5 week half-life oral treatment that is going to keep them and their neurosteroid production and their DHT production like really fucking hindered for months on end. So anyways, that is my stance on it. I think it has a lot of promise, and I think it is definitely worth looking at. So, and again though, keep in mind, this is not a turnkey solution. This is dealing with scalp DHT. Has nothing to do with scalp testosterone, has nothing to do with any of the other circulating androgens in your body. which there are other ones, not just DHT, not just testosterone. There are other androgens too. The steroidogenesis cascade does not yield just two things that are androgenic and have affinity for AR and have their own inherent binding constant, dissociation rates, and their own response elements that they elicit when they bind and activate the AR and do a bunch of shit. This is stuff that has to be accounted for from a more broad spectrum perspective. If you're very prone to hair loss, like obviously maybe if you just, you know, inhibit DHT enough, yeah, sure, maybe you'll get through the majority of your life with no issues. But at the end of the day, when you're using, especially if you get this disproportionate decrease in scalp DHT, do you know what that's going to lead to too? A disproportionate spike in scalp T. Like you're going to get a giant spike in scalp testosterone if we're getting what we're trying to get out of this stuff. Like if we're succeeding in nuking scalp DHT levels 80%, think of what that's doing to your scalp testosterone. All that 5-AR, where your T would otherwise be going through to DHT, is now left as T, and it's just chilling in your scalp. And what do you have to deal with that? What do you have to clean that up with? Well, now you're looking at AR inhibitors. Now you're looking at selective androgen receptor modulators. Now you're looking at other AR agonists that compete, or AR, whatever you want to fucking do, whatever your preferred modality of dealing with androgen receptor activation is. Selective androgen receptor degraders. You know, there's so many fucking things that are worth exploring, but in general, anti-androgens are going to be the modality that most people would probably, you know, resort to first, as it's the most, I don't know, tried and true, most well understood, most, like we actually know what the fuck it's doing. We know how to predict exactly what it's going to do to our hormone profile based on if it's a non-steroidal anti-androgen or a steroidal anti-androgen and what kind of downstream effects it may or may not have. And there are actual compounds being evaluated in the clinical setting right now that are actually, you know, designed to deal with this shit too. So obviously that's really promising too. So, you know, the classic kind of first line of defense would be, you know, if you inhibit your scalp DHT that much, you've dealt with that. Now we have to deal with broad spectrum AR activation to begin with. So now we have, you know, CBO301, RU58841, Fluridil, whatever it is that you choose, whatever it is, your preferred anti-androgen of choice is, based on what you deem cost efficient, most effective, least side effect ridden, most clinical data backing its efficacy and safety profile, whatever it is that is your criteria for what is the ideal anti-androgen, like, that would be the next step to deal with it from a broad spectrum perspective. But I do believe that that is a very comprehensive protocol and would serve a lot of people to like fully protect them, to be honest. You have a topical dutasteride plus an anti-androgen. That would be a very, you know, thoroughly well thought out protocol in my opinion. And then from there, if you needed to regain ground, like I feel like that would be enough to stave off further loss. And if you needed to regain ground, you know, that's where you would intervene with, you know, microneedling, minoxidil, whatever it is that you decide is your growth agonist of choice. There's other things you can do too, obviously, that I've discussed on my channel many times, but that is the sort of like, you know, that is how topical dutasteride would be used in a very broad general way, like not actually digging into the dosages, not digging into which application technique or vehicle or whatever you should be using, because frankly, that's a fucking 5-hour video probably trying to describe all of the different ways this thing could be leveraged. Like it's very, there are a lot of different theories going around right now, but at the end of the day, like I said, it definitely does work. Like when you actually look at the mesotherapy results, they're very good. When you look at the topical results, they're very good. They're not as good as oral, but you would expect as such without as much systemic absorption. Like you're not getting the fucking 99% inhibition, you're getting, I don't know, 70, 80% scalp inhibition, it seems like. But that's fucking great. You know, if you can get away with it side effect free, you know, that's what some people need. So anyways, take from that what you will. Thank you guys for watching. Please like, subscribe, check out my blog, moreplates.com. Follow me on Instagram at moreplates_moredates. Facebook, Snapchat, BitChute, Twitter, TikTok, Apple Podcasts. If you want to support the channel, you can check out anything I am associated with in the video description below, notably my TRT clinic, where we have pharma-grade hair loss medications, and hopefully in the future, I can work with a compounding pharmacy to get topical dutasteride made. That would be nice to have available domestically in the States. I don't know how likely that is to happen, but that is on my to-do list. Other, you know, mainstream medications that are FDA approved are through our clinic as well, and as well as my recommended lab test panels, you know, classic HRT, TRT, getting your health assessed in general. You may not need any of this shit. Maybe you just want a doctor to actually look at you and make sure you're healthy and everything is firing on all cylinders. You don't have any imbalances or deficiencies. By all means, we do it all. You know, it's telemedicine from the comfort of your own home, Skype, FaceTime, Zoom, whatever's convenient for you. do. It's a way of the future in my opinion, and it's fucking great. Anything else I'm associated with? Gorilla Mind nootropic formulas, Gorilla Mode pre-workout formulas that design myself from scratch, and anything else I am associated with, it's all in the video description below. Thank you guys for watching. Talk to you soon.